The Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission (RMAFC) has announced plans of upward to review salaries and allowances of political office holders in the country. Beneficiaries of the review are the President, Vice President, Senate President, Speaker, Chief Judge of the Federation, governors, members of the National Assembly, ministers, commissioners, and other political appointees are also beneficiaries, just like members of State House of Assembly and local council chairmen and their councillors in the 774 local government areas. A statement from the agency said the chairman of the commission, Mohammed Bello Shehu, made the disclosure when he paid a courtesy visit to the chairman, Nigerian Governors Forum, Aminu Tambuwal of Sokoto State, in his office in Abuja. Shehu stated that paragraph 32D of Part of 1 to the 3rd Schedule of 1999 Constitution as amended empowers the Commission to determine the remuneration of political, public and judicial officers. Now, to discuss salary hike of political office holders are Mr. Salahuddin Hashim, who was a Senior Program Officer, CISLAC, now Director of Programs, Clean Foundation, and Majid Dahiru, a Public Affairs Analyst. Good morning, gentlemen, and welcome to Daybreak.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Good morning, Majid. It's good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
The last time, myself and Salahuddin were running around the trenches of the West African coast on some special assignment. It's good to see you after 7-8 years.
Yeah, good to see you.
We are here again. You listened to that intro. And when that news hit, Mr. Dairu, a lot of things must have been going through your mind. We were just battling to explain a 20 trillion naira budget with about 11 trillion deficit. And the bulk of that deficit is to finance recurrent expenditure and debt service. Whatever is going to I mean, we are already overshooting what it was we had projected we'll spend this year at 10 months. We are not sure where we will be by December. The government is not even sure where to find the next fund. They're talking about taxing poverty as a way of raising revenue. And in the face of all of this, the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Planning Commission wakes up and tells Nigeria that whatever it is we are carrying right now that is making us suffocate is not enough. They want to increase the salary of public officers. We understand, yes, they said it's a constitutional responsibility, but does it make sense to you? Or did it make sense to you when that news came to you? How exactly did you feel as a Nigerian watching the trajectory, from that announcement?
It didn't make sense to me because it doesn't make sense at all. At the time we are supposed to be talking about cutting down on cost of governance, we are contemplating increasing the cost of governance across the board. And when you talk about governance in this country, is there really governance? We are actually contemplating increasing the cost of maintaining people that are in government because they're not actually rendering governance. If they were, our physical reality would be as grim as we just painted it. And it is even worse than you've said because there's a projected crude oil benchmark of 1.6 million barrels per day, which realistically cannot be met given the current situation of oil theft in the Niger Delta and other host oil-producing communities. And so what we have today is a fiscal tragedy waiting to happen. And at such a time, the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission is contemplating what it ordinarily shouldn't even contemplate at all, shouldn't occur to it, to raise remunerations, salaries and allowances for the various cadre of political office holders in Nigeria. It's not only insensitive. We need to say it the way it is. It makes no sense. In fact, are you rewarding Nigeria's political class for underperformance? Ordinarily, events should have been done is to actually reduce their salaries and allowances for poor performance because it is a collective failure that has brought us on the brinks of state failure. When we talk about state failure, not only security, economic failure is also part of state failure, where the government can no longer meet its responsibility of welfare and security to citizens. These are early warning signs of state failure. So are you rewarding the same political class that has misruled the country to the point that we're going to borrow to service debt? If you know what that means, Maybe somebody is not making sense of what's about to happen. And it's such a time you are talking about increasing salaries for presidents, vice presidents, when they are already consuming a bulk of our commonwealth without delivering on key performance indices of leadership. So ordinarily, this is actually, it's not just about insensitive, it is actually infuriating. It's frustrating, really. It means somebody is seriously detached from reality. And I think all of us as Nigerians must come together and say, that should not happen. It must not happen and should not be allowed to happen.
So, Mr. Salahuddin, let's hear your own. What are your thoughts,
Yeah, for me, the fact that at the time when the health of our public finance is on life support, I don't think it is the proper and appropriate timing to make such proposition. First, two, at the time where the salaries of lecturers in their school hasn't been paid for 8 months. And of course, children and prospective leaders for this country have also stayed home for about 8 months. Such proposition is coming on the table. At a time where governors and the Governors Forum had proposed that civil servants who are above 50 years should be retired as a result of the inability to pay, such proposition is coming on the table. I think it is actually an irresponsible kind of thought from somebody that is coming. At a time where we have a larger chunk, over 60–70% of our consumables coming from borrowing, where we have deficits in our budgeting, and we are borrowing to actually pay overhead, not borrowing for infrastructure. We are borrowing for overhead. We are borrowing to pay debt. At that time, somebody is coming with such proposition. I think it is actually an opportunity for us to again do an appraisal of the political elite and ask ourselves if indeed this is the kind of system of governance that we really should be yearning for. The part of campaign promises of the president when he came to the office was that he was going to reduce cost of governance. Okay, that hasn't happened. Part of his promises were that he was going to boost the economy. That hasn't happened. Part of the promises were that he was going to increase job and, of course, fortify the issue of security. That hasn't happened. So it tells you very clearly that there is something within statecraft, and there is an elite capture of the society. And that is the reason why such kind of proposal can come to the table for the president with over 360 members of the National Assembly, and, of course, some state governors taking over 63 billion naira. And that, for me, is something that we really need to further interrogate. And we need to interrogate it already for individuals like the previous speaker had mentioned, had taken a bulk of our national resources. And of course, it is a case of stealing the country blind, as it were, and of course, paying over 2,000 special advisors who are also going to benefit from this entire jumbo pay. It is not the proper time to do so. I think what we should be doing now is to pay attention to how to restore education, how to put in any extra resources into financing restoration, because what we have lost in the academics in the last 8 months will take a whole lot of time to recover. There are other sectors of the economy that requires funding, and how we, not for individuals to continue to go up and take us into this. And that in itself also form part of the entire architecture of political economy that deals with how you consistently impoverish the people, continue to empower the elite, and that is how empowerment has led to additional disempowerment. And I think it is important that some people should actually bury that idea, because it is ill-timed and it might just create another sort of protest from different parts of the society.
Mr. Dairo, coming back to you and listening to Saleu, and of course a host of other public commentaries, that had followed this announcement. Some analysts have argued that we are not going to find any money anywhere, at any rate. The government IOUs have even overshot. It's almost the size,
both locally and internationally.
The size of our national, the local one, the ways and means from the CBN alone is over 20 trillion.
Yeah.
Whatever limits that are available by any global best practice. And some public commentators have argued that it will be difficult to find new fundings. What we need to do is to re-engineer our balance sheet and find the extra funding that are required to do some of the critical infrastructures or social interventions, if you like, the case may be. What sense do you get of this new leadership of Rama? Does it seem like they are detached from the Nigerian reality, or they do not understand what we are confronted with? Because even this government, I think the president and the vice president took some kind of informal pay cuts on resumption upon realizing that we really need to find a way to cut down. But that is just a tip of the iceberg, because we didn't see other politicians take that too. I mean, what would have been ideal is that because the president has announced a 50% or whatever percent cut in his income, others who were also claiming to be patriotic would have just basically taken the Senate. We are not seeing that. What sense? I'm trying to make sense of it. What do you make of even the kind of persons that seem to man these agencies? Because they only seem to understand their role from an upward review and not a possible downward review in the face of our reality.
You have asked a very important question. For an institution such as the Revenue Allocation and Fiscal Mobilization Commission, you would have expected to have seasoned financial experts, management experts, patriots, who understand the times and will know how to intervene on such constitutional responsibilities as fixing the wages and remuneration of public servants in the country. Such that at a time like this, one would have expected such distinguished Nigerians and patriots to actually advocate for a downward review of these pecs of offices for our distinguished political leadership gentlemen and women. But unfortunately, there's something that has gone wrong with Nigeria since 1999. My colleague here talked about the political economy. Nigeria's political economy is hinged firmly on resource sharing and not resource production. And that is because Nigeria's political process is primarily driven by politics of identity of religion and ethnicity. And I've always argued that the major reward system for identity politics is patronage. And patronage is a sexy word for corruption, grand corruption. A corruption that simply seeks to take from the system as much as possible. We call it national cake sharing. So every position in the country, from heads of MDAs to members of commissions and boards of parastatals, have come under this patronage system. And so you find that people that are actually appointed into an important commission, such as the Revenue Allocation and Fiscal Mobilization Commission, are partisan politicians that were put there for the purpose of the continuous and elaborate patronage system.
So clearly,
so their focus...
there is no scientific approach to...
No. Their focus is, this is our opportunity now to also take from the system. And in doing this, we also need to satisfy the entire political class because we put here for that purpose. So you don't be surprised about that. And that is why Nigeria has continuously degenerated in terms of economy to a debt-burdened country that is losing lifelines, both domestically and internationally, on new sources of financing rapidly because we've not shown enough fiscal responsibility, because we've actually violated our own fiscal responsibility laws domestically when we overshot our threshold, for example, by way of ways and means from the CBN and all other aspects of misconduct, financial misconduct in public service. And so this is a reflection, or should I say a symptom of a deep-seated ailment that is at the core of the dysfunction of the Nigerian state. And I've always advocated that, look, to resolve this problem, we can't resolve it from just treating the symptoms. We have to carry out a proper diagnosis in order to arrive at a specific reason why we are having this sort of degenerative problem. The problem has so degenerated that it will be difficult for the current system, if not completely reconfigured, to regenerate Nigeria's political process, its political economy, and even redeem its constitutional democracy. It's as though our democracy is no longer yielding the much anticipated dividends of democracy that ushered in that euphoria that welcomed Nigeria's transition from military to civil democratic rule in 1999. And that is because the patronage system, that is the only reward system for partisan politics in Nigeria, has made it impossible for governments, successive democratically elected governments, to deliver it on its mandate of welfare and security. It's increasingly difficult. And so we need to sit down and have a conversation about our kind of democracy, because democracy remains the best form of government.
Absolutely.
But Nigeria's democracy is not in practice in line with the rules, regulations, and codes of conduct of proper democracies. And that is where the conversation for me should start from.
Well, let me direct this at Mr. Salahuddin. Let me just quickly spell this out before I go to my next question. At the moment, salaries of some political and public office holders are as follows. The president is collecting over 40 million per annum, the vice president over 12 million, ministers, SGF, HOS, chairman of constitutional bodies over 7 million, ministers of state, members of constitutional bodies over 7 million, and even special advisors, including speechwriters, are collecting over 7 million. You know, as a normal Nigerian, their reaction to this, you know, is not quite encouraging. How can Nigerians, you know, protest this proposal?
Yeah, I think I will begin by just wanting to reference the last comment he made about democracy being the best system of government, which is globally accepted. But of course, we can also adapt it. There is nobody who says we can also use this kind of democracy. We also can adapt it to suit our own context. And obviously, if you look at the most progressive economies in the world, they don't even practice democracy anyway. But unfortunately, it only offers people an opportunity to also participate and gives you that sense of inclusion. But unfortunately, what we have here today is just a group of individuals who have organized themselves to continue to pilot their affairs in the wrong direction. And that in itself is something we need to establish. And then, of course, considering what is collected, I think it is a little bit modest when you reference their salaries. Okay, and while Solly was making his intro and he mentioned that the president and the vice president accepted pay cuts, they actually accepted pay cuts on their basic salaries, not on the allowances, because you know that allowances are over 300 times bigger than the actual salaries. So, I mean, anybody can let go of any amount from the salary because it's a fraction of whatever that comes. And it tells you that we have a system that is not very honest, okay? When you have an administration where leadership selection process is actually very faulty, this is actually what you get at the end of the day. You realize that since we returned to democracy, there has been a commercialization of our leadership selection process, okay? And if you have those kind of approaches, there is no way you are going to isolate yourself from this gratification system where individuals now use offices as an opportunity to pay back their paymasters, you know, for some kind of favors, supposedly. Because it is not about merit anymore, okay? It is not about critical thinking. It is not about people who have actually who have a trajectory of performance, and of course for so reasons they have actually had the opportunity to now occupy public office. It is a case, like he mentioned, that borders around identity, okay, and borders around who exactly you know and who is able to drive you to the top echelon. And unfortunately, because we have that system of a winner takes all, and we have this situation that borders around how the regime itself is configured in a manner that does not leave room for accountability. The only reason why a number of us are disappointed is within the mantra within which this administration was actually brought to power in the first place. And every promises they have made. You know, I wonder how people actually sleep at night. How you sleep at night, knowing fully well that as an adult, you have actually made a promise either to your son or to a younger colleague or to a brother, and you are seen to deliberately or ignorantly not to have fulfilled that. And then, of course, what does your conscience begin to tell you? I think it is important that we begin to, first of all, conscientize. And I wrote an open letter to the president over the October 1st, and I said, look, it is important for him to do a scorecard of what exactly were the campaign promises and put them side by side with the reality on the ground. And he shouldn't allow those who would come and give him a cosmetic analysis of what he has actually achieved. He should be out there to be able to tell and request some kind of feedback. And because we have an absence of monitoring and evaluation, process monitoring has actually failed in this country. People no longer do an evaluation. All we do is put out policies out there, then we go to sleep, and one day we just come back and say, look, how have we performed? We have a budgeting system that is actually very faulty. When he came to the office, he said he was going to begin to operate a zero budgeting approach that would help us develop a needs-based approach to development. That failed from the first day. He said he was going to create the proximity between budget and national planning, which made a lot of sense to me, because for you to budget properly, it means that you must be able to adequately plan, because planning actually fits into that. And then, of course, that actually brought about the merger between budget and national planning, which was a beautiful idea. But what is the result? The result has suggested that it was an idea that wasn't thought through, and then, of course, it just has led us to this point where we are. And finally, for me, is the fact that I saw a prototype of where Singapore and Malaysia were going to be for the next 50 years. And it is actually a product of planning. And unfortunately for us, we are not even in that pathway towards ensuring that we put indicators that can help us understand that we are making progressive growth. We have governments who have also engaged themselves in oil theft, just like he had mentioned. We have governments who themselves, and you mentioned about the issue of reconfiguring our revenue architecture. Most government agencies don't even remit anymore. And that includes the ministry where the president is also the minister, okay? And the Auditor General's office has flagged this consistently. And every audit report suggests that a lot of ministries don't remit, but nothing happens. And it tells you a lot of things.
I would like to hold your thoughts there. You've made quite a number of interesting points for us to chew, and especially I would like to reemphasize your comment around asking the president to do a self-appraisal. I would remind you that in several forums these last few days, whether it's at the UN or wherever he appears, he seems to be telling us that he has done well by his own capacity. Whether or not the reality reflects on the ground, it's a different conversation. We will take a short breather to pay some bills. When we return, I can assure you that there is more interesting part of this conversation to come to you. Please stay with us.
Residents of the Federal Capital Territory are hereby alerted to the activities of scavengers, also known as Babambula, which security agencies have identified as a high-level security threat to not only the residents, but also to our infrastructure as they perpetrate petty stealing and acts of vandalism on public utilities. More so, they are drug peddlers, serve as spies to terrorist elements, and are ready-made tools for the public disturbances during which they attack people with dangerous weapons. The Federal Capital Territory Administration therefore reiterates that the ban on scavengers, aka Bababula, operating within the Federal Capital City is still in force. These miscreants are advised to stay off the streets of the Federal Capital City for their own good, as defaulters will be apprehended and prosecuted, including parents of underage children involved in these practices. Relevant agencies are carrying out enforcement of this ban as stipulated. Be law-abiding always. Let's together build the FCT of our dreams. Management Announcer.
Thank you very much. If you're just joining us, it's Daybreak on Trust Television. And we have been evaluating the indications coming out of the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Planning Commission that they are set to review. And by that, I mean upward review the salaries of public office holders in Nigeria. I will still be staying with you, Mr. Salah, because I had to cut your thought last time to interrogate a certain aspect of that conversation, which was, we talked about the salaries of our judicial officers. Is it also proper in this conversation to throw away the baby and the bathwater? There have been comments about our judicial officers being the worst, one of the worst paid in the world. We know the condition of some of our judges, and we know the implication for the carriage of justice, and that's why politicians can just probably walk into the inner chambers and practically secure judgments. We have governors today who are sitting in a state where they didn't even participate in an election, and you are wondering the kind of dislocation that all of these things had brought to our democracy. Is there a justification for the review, for instance, of the judicial office, our judges and other judicial officers' salary in the context of this whole conversation for around this call?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when I actually reflect to think that Nigeria was actually bought by the British so I always think that maybe that jinx is the reason why everything in Nigeria is actually for sale. Because, you know, Nigeria was actually sold for £650,000. so maybe it actually for me now historical. And, you know, from the part of the country where I come from, there are certain things early in life that actually determines how your future now turns out to be. But coming out to your question, is the fact that everything in this country is actually for sale, irrespective of how much you pay judges. Okay, those who want to be corrupt will still be corrupt. Those who want to induce them will still induce them. And those critical areas where we need increment, I think we need to put in a lot of effort there. For every country that is actually serious with itself, he knows too well that you must pay attention to education. The entry level for a professor in the university is actually 310,000. And the bar at the point of is actually 410. Okay, so which means that at the time you are retiring as a professor, you're actually earning 410,000 naira. And that is supposed to be a man who spent all his life trying to articulate political solutions, economic, and all the architecture of ensuring that we have a future and a generation that we can then be proud of. And obviously you realize that we have completely ostracized that particular sector from any focus or any specificity of development. And that, for me, is a call for concern. The second area where we need is that we need to also industrialize, okay? We need to put a lot of enabling environment in industrialization for this country. We are a consuming nation, for God's sake. We consume everything, okay? And there is no way you can face the reality of what we see in terms of our budgeting deficit without earning foreign exchange. How do you earn foreign exchange? It's only through export. So what do we have to export? The only thing we have to export in this country, as I tell you, is actually faith and churches and the rest of that, because there is absolutely nothing else that goes out of this country that earns us foreign exchange. And for me, it is actually something that calls for serious concern. SMEs are actually comatose because infrastructures that help to support their growth are actually deficit. A lot of them don't even have overhead. Even the diesel, they now have to generate their own power, has now gone up to close to 1,000 naira per litre. That, for me, are the areas that government need to find bailouts, you know, to be able to support. The aviation industry. If you go to Addis, we just mentioned about you. If you go to Addis and you see how the aviation has become the GDP for national growth, you will now ask yourself, what exactly were we doing? Were we sleeping all the time? I tell you, one of the key gaps we have as a country is that we don't do critical thinking. And if you don't do critical thinking and you allow the system to automate itself and you think that some sort of miracles will happen at some way, it is not so. There is no quality that happens by happenstance. You must be deliberate. You must actually marshal them to happen. We must pay attention to production, industrialization, education, and ensure that we focus a lot of attention around reducing all of those leakages in our governance. If we don't do that, we are going to be in serious trouble.
Oh, that's very, very interesting.
Indeed.
Well, let me just direct this at you. They call it the Jackpot syndrome, right? A lot of people are leaving, particularly young Nigerians. And we're hearing the federal government saying it's going to do something about it. It's going to stop Nigerians from migrating to other countries through the use of technology and providing job opportunities for young people and all of that. And this is a conversation we've heard over and over again. Do you think this is something that's going to stop anytime soon? It
will only stop when Nigeria becomes a serious-minded country that can provide adequate welfare and security for citizens, that guarantees equal citizenship for all, where the Nigerian dream of being successful and meeting your aspirations or goals and dreams in life can be achieved without you necessarily knowing somebody, but simply knowing something. And where your ethnicity and religion will not be a concrete ceiling against your progress in life. Neither will it also enhance your chances in life. Everything will have to be based on equal citizenship, merit, and competence. Until that is done in Nigeria, you cannot prevent people who are disadvantaged by the current system from moving to saner climes, where you have equal citizenship rights, where those countries, such as the United States of America, the UK, and most of course, Western Europe, Southeast Asia, where there's a national dream, and this national dream has progressively been met, and millions of people have been pulled out of poverty onto the path of prosperity, where they have equal access to the state, where they have equal protection of the state, and where they don't suffer any form of advantage or disadvantage based on race, ethnicity, religion, creed, and all other, identity issues. And that brings back to the question of nation building. We have run away from this issue for so long that we do not seem to realize the importance of first having a nation before any form of development, and I repeat, any, including security and welfare, can take place. My colleague talked about the fact that there are some countries in the world that are not practicing representative democracy, and they are doing well. Because China is a good example, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and most of the Gulf countries. But there's one thing that's the common denominator between progressive and prosperous liberal democratic countries like as we have in North America and Western Europe, and some of these not so democratic countries, such as we have in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and some other parts of the world. There's one common denominator. From Saudi Arabia to the United Arab Emirates, and from United States of America to Canada and UK, all of these countries have achieved nationhood.
Absolutely.
They have been able to harmonize the disparate identities of their various territories into a national identity. So you have Americans. It is possible to be black, to be Asian, to be European, to be Hispanic, to be Indian, and to be American.
Absolutely.
And who become president and vice president.
As you see clearly in the case of
in the UK, it is possible to be Pakistani and become the mayor of London.
Absolutely.
It is possible to be Indian and become the prime minister of UK. It is possible to be a German and be the Queen of England. It is possible to be a Greek and be the King of England as we have it today. These are countries that have become nations. In the case of Nigeria, we are still a country of tribesmen of over 1,000 ethnic nationalities, and not a nation of citizens. And so for me, the work that we need to do now should go into nation building critically. It's when you build a nation and you're able to unite a people around a common identity, national identity, and you build citizens out of tribesmen. A citizen is rational. A citizen has a balanced personality. A citizen understands that he is or she is because we are. A citizen would naturally desire for others what he or she desires for himself.
Absolutely.
And so social justice, equity and fairness will come to bear because there's a recognition of our commonality, of our oneness and our similarities. And this is even very easy for Nigeria. Nigeria 62, I wrote an opinion piece that was widely published where I said, look, Nigeria is actually a country that is divided in oneness. Our problem is not a lack of unity diversity. Anybody who is not a Nigerian watching this program from any part of the world will believe that all of us sitting here today are members of the same family.
Yes.
Because we're a monoracial people. I keep making this point. And the constituent peoples of Nigeria, from the east to the west, from the north to the south, have long-standing ancestral, historical, sociological, cultural links that actually present us in reality as evidence-based presentation as members of the same Black African family.
Absolutely.
And so it should not be too difficult for us to unite And this is the problem we need to begin to resolve. This lack of unity and oneness is Nigeria's major challenge. Not even lack of unity and diversity, because we hardly qualify to be called a diverse country. We're a plural country, a plurality of the same black African family.
I wish we had time to take more. This conversation is drilling into very interesting corners.
Actually, I just didn't want the conversation to stop.
I hope that we find time to continue this debate. A one-off cry or a one-off shout will not stop this political elite from doing what they want to do. The charge from the Trust TV studio also to the civil society is to also confront this conversation with facts and statistics.
Absolutely.
We must be able to work out what it will cost this nation to go down this line and begin to put these statistics before their very face and tell them we cannot avoid this. We've had interesting gentlemen in the studio, the Director of Program Clean Foundation, and Mr. Moshid Dairu, a public affairs analyst, and Salahuddin, of course, my friend.
Thank you very much.